All right, we are live. Hello and welcome to MBA Waves. My name is Eric Lucrezia. I'm your host for this evening. I am the former director of recruitment for the Global MBA program at ESSEC Business School in Paris and in Singapore, and the founder of Candidate Coach, where I work with candidates from all over the world who are seeking entry into the world of MBAs. And I am here tonight, as always, with my co-host and MBA Waves, Bara. Hi, Bara.
Hi, Bara Sapir here.
Want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure, I'd love to. I'm in the Bay Area. It's a gorgeous day. I'm the CEO and founder of City Test Prep and MindFlow, and we're a full service test preparation company. We work with students middle school through the medical boards, but we work with MBA hopefuls quite a bit. We have a book out, actually a GMAT sentence correction book that's out. And we help students not only with the content and the strategy, but also time management and mindset. So just like the application is like your whole person, the essays, interviews, the test, it's also who you are and how you show up for these things. So we help with students with that as well.
Excellent. So MBA Waves was founded almost a year ago. Today is episode 40, and today we're going to dive into the whole world of rankings, specifically the Times MBA rankings that came out not that long ago. And we're going to ask, well, if there's some questions, and if any questions come in from the audience, feel free to ask us. We're streaming on Facebook. I am coming from rainy London, UK. And well, let's just dive into it. So, Bar, did you want to lead us off with any kind of questions?
Well, before we hop into that, I do want to just acknowledge that one of the things that I've been thinking about this past week with everything going on with Ukraine and in observing the president there and what a leader he is being. And so much of the work that Eric and I do is really about people going to leadership school, right? And it's really about training people to be the best leaders that they can be. So I just want to just say my solidarity with what all of these people are doing in the Ukraine fighting for freedom and the leadership that the president is doing and how much respect and honor that I have for what they're doing. I just want to acknowledge that here.
Thank you so much for saying that, Bara. Totally agree. It's really nice to see the solidarity across a lot of most nations around the world and just people, citizens doing what they can, saying what they can, providing money if they can. So yeah, absolutely. Okay.
And I do have questions. Okay. So, the rankings it's such an interesting system. And these rankings come out for colleges and for grad schools and for business schools. I remember when I was in grad school, we were ranked in the top 4 at University of Michigan for the art history department. And so I was pretty psyched about that. But with the Financial Times, with their rankings, when do they actually come out? And are they highly anticipated? Is this something that people clamor to see? And how much weight do they have for the programs?
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of things in that question I'm going to try to unpack there. So the Financial Times is one of many rankings out there. And what we're talking about is full-time MBA programs, right? And there's rankings, as you said, art history. Was that your studies?
Yeah, for grad school.
Yeah. Okay. So there's rankings for that sort of thing. Financial Times covers rankings for business schools, naturally. So there's the full-time MBA, executive, Masters in Management, or MIM, as it's often known as. There's multiple rankings out there. And for the full-time MBA, also known as the Global MBA, that comes out usually late January or early February. And this year was a little bit later than usual. It came out around the 15th, I'm going to say, something like that, mid-Feb. So I think that also contributed to the anticipation. But we also had a really interesting year because last year, because of COVID, the top 7, so to speak, American business schools, also known as the M7 or Magnificent 7 or Magic 7, or whatever you want to call them, opted not to participate in the rankings, citing the peculiarity of the year because of COVID, that it wasn't representative of a true year. So in the 2021 rankings, which came out in early Feb last year, they were absent, conspicuously absent, which had an interesting impact. That allowed for certain other schools to enter the rankings for the first time, and a lot of other schools naturally moved up. So what we see this year is, let's call it a natural correction, let's say, as they've now, sort of come back in with a vengeance to be part of the full-time MBA rankings. talk about some of the other rankings that are out there. Besides Financial Times, U.S. News and World Report, and that's one of the most looked at American rankings, right? So they don't focus on other or international or global. Could be hybrid, where they factor in the their into coefficient that they use for their rankings. But Financial Times is often cited as the benchmark, often the most respected ranking system out there. So having a high spot on the FT rankings is a very coveted place to be. That said, ranking a good text, don't know really what's out there. It gives you a full view of the landscape of some of the big key players in the world of MBA programs. So it is important in that sense. And that's why I think a lot of people are really interested in it. They came out, like I said, mid-February. Here we are, the 1st of March. A little bit later than I wanted to talk about this, but last week we had a really important topic to discover in terms of, in terms of interviewing and preparing for that. So here we are, a little bit behind schedule. But interestingly enough, I had an opportunity with MBA Tube, candidate coach, did an interview with one of the schools that entered the rankings this year, which we're going to get into shortly, and did an article which will be coming out shortly. So look out for that on MBA Tube and MBA grad schools. So hopefully that covers all the areas of your question. Did I miss something?
Yeah, no, it is really interesting. And how in your experience when you look at the different rankings, like the U.S. News and World Report and the Financial Times, like how in simpatico are they? Like, do you find that like, I was about to say the G7, but it's the Magic 7, the M7. How are they? Is it a toss up? And usually, like, what winds up being distinguishing between these different ranking systems?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a really important question, especially if you're looking at MBA programs, like to understand what those rankings mean, right? So it's all about the methodology. And the methodologies for each rankings company are relatively public. Like you can mostly access what their methodology, sort of like say their algorithm is, so to speak, to be more modern about it. That will vary quite a bit from ranking to ranking, right? So some, like, I can't remember if it's Fortune 500 or Forbes, their rankings, that it's really very much about salary, salary increase from before to after your MBA program. Others weigh other factors in their calculation. Everything from, let's see, the professor side, where it's like the number of professors that have PhDs in their fields, the number of articles that they've published, to diversity among the faculty and staff. And then on the student side, not only about salary increase, but the diversity among the students, male to female, international students. Aims is one of the things Financial Times talks about. Were aims achieved in terms of what the student was looking for going into the program to what they really felt that they experienced coming out of it. So it's quite complex, and there's a whole percentage points of how much each thing counts. The way they usually work is there are questionnaires that are sent out. They're run by the school, right? Everything is audited and controlled, but the school has to organize their survey where they ask these questions to their alumni. And in the case of the Financial Times, it is 3 years out. So it's not the alumni that have just graduated, right? You're not going to interview these people. Most people in the world, presume that the return on your investment of your MBA program really starts to be felt 3 years after you've graduated, right? Maybe the first job you've had, especially if you've done a major pivot, like switching industries, switching countries, switching functions, you might not see that ROI straight away. So it's usually 3 years out. Those people are surveyed, have to collect a certain percentage of grads for it to count, for them to be eligible. And we've seen that in the past, actually. There was an example of a business school, a very highly ranked business school, that I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago was actually cut out from the rankings because they didn't have enough alumni respond to that service. It's really important. I'll just kind of plant the seed early for those of you who are future MBAs to know that it's very important for the reputation of your school to respond to those alumni surveys. I know it's a challenge to get people. The people are busy. But coming back to your question, it's really all about the methodology. And as you look into each ranking to understand why there could be a pretty good amount of variation from one ranking to the next, as well as from 1 year to the next, you can see some movement up or down of a school from 1 year to the next, but more so between different rankings because of the way they calculate things.
Interesting. So when you look at these rankings overall, have you noticed any trends this year? Have there been anything that have stood out, even in terms of the response to COVID that we've dealt with the past couple of years?
Yeah, well, the first trend is something that I already referred to earlier, the fact that, we had those major 7 business schools. I'm not gonna say best because that's a very subjective
Yeah,
perspective.
that we're
But those highly prestigious 7 schools that have a sort of alliance, let's say together, collectively decided not to participate. So as they've participated again this year, we saw a big shift in a lot of schools. Some schools that were able to enter in 2021 got knocked out this year. Some schools have seen them slide down, but not in every case. There's schools that continue to move up. For example, ESSEC Business School, they entered the rankings something like 2018, if I'm not mistaken. Because, for business school, by the way, to be eligible, they have to exist for at least 3 years, since, as I mentioned, that they calculate or they survey alumni 3 years out, right? So you can't survey a school if it's just existed for 1 year. They also have to have a minimum of 30 participants or students in the program for several years in a row to be even eligible to participate in the rankings. So there's a whole bunch of criteria that has to happen. So ESSEC was eligible for the rankings for the first time in 2018. At the time, it was still a relatively young program, and they entered around 94, 95. And each year they've been moving up. They were in the 80s and 70s. I think they're in like the low 70s now, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have that number in mind. You can pull that up, actually. Now, in terms of like regionality, that's something I was looking at, comparing over the last 3 years, where was there a change in where business schools are located? Because you see a lot of interest in Asia these days. That's one of the things, applications increasing more and more from some of the Asian business schools. And I've noticed more schools from India, more schools from China. So in my mind, I was like, okay, there must be more business schools from the Asian continent or that region of the world, Asia Pacific, than in the past. But actually, it's not the case.
I think I saw one in the top 10. Didn't I? Did I
Sorry?
see one of the top 10? I think I saw one in Asia in the top 10 or the top 15. There was I don't know if it was in Hong Kong or China, but I thought when I looked
Well,
over the list that
it's a little bit more complicated than that, right? So you have INSEAD, for example, which was number 1 last year, right? Now, mind you, it was number 1 in a year where we didn't have those 7 business schools, but they didn't deserve it because years ago, I'm talking like, or as well as 5 years ago, I believe, 2 years in a row, INSEAD was number 1 with those 7 business schools from the States. So there's no reason why they didn't deserve it last year. But INSEAD has 3 main campuses so near Paris, it's called Fontainebleau. The second in Singapore, and they have another campus in Abu Dhabi. So INSEAD representing Asia with Singapore in the number 3 position, they're definitely in the top 10. But beyond that, I think the next one is CEIBS, the Chinese European International Business School in China. They're in position number 16 this year. That's the next one that's there. And then you have in 21, this 21st spot is the National University of Singapore, known as NUS. And there's a bunch more. This year we have a school from South Korea and a bunch from India. I'm not going to rattle off all the names, but yeah, what I was going to say is I thought there would be more of a trend of like more schools appearing in the top 1 from Asia, thus having an impact on Europe and North America. But actually, it's been pretty consistent. Over the last 3 years, we've seen approximately 55 business schools from North America appear, so US and Canada, about 25, if I'm not mistaken, is it 20? Yeah, 25 from Europe and 20 from Asia. That's the number. And it's been consistent over the last 3 years. So that's not really changed to my surprise. But nonetheless, there is definitely an increase in applications if you look at the GMAT numbers in schools throughout Asia. So that's more or less the main trends.
So speaking of GMAT, since you brought it up, does the
Yeah.
GMAT, GRE, or EA come into play at all with the schools, or is that alum that since
I just dropped my phone.
Oh, do they have does that have any impact on the rankings at all, the test scores?
Yeah, certainly. I don't know how I missed that earlier, but that's definitely one of the criteria for several of the rankings systems out there. So I would put the question back to you when thinking about, applying for business school, how do rankings factor in, and what the GMAT means there in terms of this process, and how people might be targeting certain schools and certain scores based on that. So what are you seeing in your world?
Well, what I don't usually deal with the rankings at all, because when students come to me, we want them to get the best score that they can get. Like, that's our goal. And then they usually figure out which schools they're applying to, and often they're working with an admissions consultant, or they look at these rankings and they look at what the schools are known for. But one thing that I don't know how it's a little related to this, which is that some employers want to know people's scores after they graduate, right? So
Absolutely.
it's also important to think about the continuum of that test score. And it sounds like it's also important for the schools and for the student in understanding that range of scores that the school is going to look for, because the school is whoever they bring in to make up the class. It's also whoever they're ushering through their program, and who's leaving, what they're doing and how they're showing up in the world, right? So, but we don't specifically deal with rankings so much. We
Right.
just know we know the top schools that students are applying to. Not that all of our students are applying to top schools, because there's other factors, right? Some people just want to go get a business degree someplace local, right?
Mhm.
And they want the best local school. I'm living in San Francisco, so like I've got Berkeley right here, and then there's Stanford, right? And those are pretty high up there in the in the
Absolutely.
um in the listings. So that's what I would probably say about my relationship to listings. I don't usually pay too much attention, which is why I'm glad I can ask you these questions and learn.
But do you find that people who are coming to you, because so your model, like the way you approach test prep, is very much about, managing stress and anxiety and so on. So like when people are targeting a certain score, I can imagine that drives a certain amount of anxiety. And maybe there's something you want to comment on that about advice or yeah.
Yeah, I believe what it really comes down to is you're not really trying to get the score can come. Like, all of these tests are really coachable. It's really about being at peace with yourself to perform your best. It's really
Mm,
about being at peace with knowing that you've done everything that you can do, and that you're going to show up that day, and it's not going to be different than any other diagnostic and any other situation. You're not all of a sudden going to take a nosedive, and you're not all of a sudden going to just knock it out of the park way further than you've already knocked it out of the park. So
right.
it's really a sense of being at peace with yourself and hoping that everything moves in your favor, so that there's no surprises, and giving students the tools to feel that they really are they've done everything that they could do, so they can relax in that space.
Absolutely. It's interesting the approach you mentioned, like kind of you said, right? You're really about coaching people to get the best possible, and from that point, seeing what schools that they can apply to. And for me, when clients come to me, it really depends on where they are in their process. Like, are they applying in a relatively short amount of time, and we only have this much of time to work with, or they're looking like 3 or 4 years out, right? And they have the time to invest and focus on the score. But for me, as somebody who works in the strategy of applications and really trying to have the best application possible, very much a part of it is finding the right fit, right? We do this whole like researching and soul searching process, and so much more important, I would say, than just a ranking or the notoriety of a school is finding the school that's the right fit for you, because it's about the school that's going to have expertise in your domain, that's going to have examples of alumni that work in the field or the companies that you're targeting, that have the culture that matches with your personality and your learning style. So these things are super important, are going to play very much into your success. So I generally, if the time is there, come from the perspective of like start with finding, the fit, right? That's a whole process, right? And based on the fit, you have your target schools. And then within that range, I would have like, the kind of the reach schools, the spot on kind of where and then this kind of safe schools. So you have a couple in each category when you narrow down the schools you're actually going to apply to. And then like the goal is to try to get the GMAT score that's going to be the expectation of that school to get in, right? And that's when we work with someone like you to do everything you can. But I like that approach also because not only because it's driven by the fit and not by a test score, but it gives you something to strive for. But I think what's really helpful about what you do, Bara, is like it's sort of like being at peace with yourself, as you said. Like it's a two-pronged thing, like striving to be the best version of yourself that you can be, but also the acceptance that this is where you're going to cap. This is where you're going to max out.
Yeah, yeah. I think that sometimes people come to us with this expectation that they need to have an 800, and it's like, well, why? Like,
Yeah.
what? Like, who said that you had? Like, who said that you needed to have that? Just
Right.
because you get a perfect score does not mean you're going to get into the schools that you're even looking at. And so it's really about making the student realize that it's a very organic it's an organic process where we can help that student get a high score. And you can also look at like a school like Columbia, where the score, I mean, it used to be that people just wanted to get 650, 700, and people are coming to us now and they're like, no, we need to actually break through the 700 you know
Sure.
point. And so, scores are trending up. Not like everyone always wants to get a 700, 750, 760 plus. Everyone always wants to get that, but it is your whole package, right? And I often tell them, you just don't want schools to reject you because your score. It's just that it's they're not going to be looking at, oh, this guy doesn't know geometry. Like, they don't know any of that, but they want to know that you've reached a threshold, and that threshold has some room, right?
Right.
So, but it is also like, you want to be in the school that's the right fit for you. You don't want to go someplace where you're going to be struggling the whole time. You want to find your fit, and you don't want the GMAT or the GRE or the EA to keep you out of where you actually do fit in.
Totally. Yeah. So bringing it back to rankings, that does the test scores are a part of that process for most of the methodologies, most of the rankings that are out there. That does factor in somehow. So the schools, of course, want to maintain a certain standard that's going to demonstrate the quality program of their admission standards, the students and their alumni. And speaking of alumni, you did mention something else before, and we did talk about this in a previous episode of MBA Waves of taking an application, a GMAT waiver, and the advantages of different disadvantages of that. And post MBA employment, certain companies like top 4, top companies in some consulting. You may, the McKinseys, the Bains, the BCGs, they are looking at GMAT scores. So that is important. But I don't want to talk about too much about the GMAT itself. Today's about rankings. So what else you got for me, Bara?
Well, did you notice some big winners this year for 2022 in the rankings? Have there been some standouts?
Yeah, well, so first of all, who's in the top of the list? We have to recognize the great work that Wharton has done, right? So they're number 1 this year. Congratulations. It's not their first time, so they're kind of like, I guess, reclaiming old territory, regaining old territory. So hats off to Wharton Business School. But so there's some new entrants that I think are definitely worth recognizing this year. We have 2 in Asia that really stood out to me. So one is Tongji, and the other is Peking Business School in Guanghua. I'm going to mess up the pronunciation. Guanghua, which I believe, it's somewhere in or near Beijing or Peking, depending how you want to say it. But they are, 2 shining stars that have entered the rankings this year pretty highly as well, like in the mid 50s and 60s. Which is a great entry point. Like I mentioned earlier on in the program, when ESSEC entered the MBAs, it was like in the 90s, and that's like pretty common to enter kind of low and you work your way up, and they've slow and steady been climbing. And I think it's a very healthy approach. It's very rare for a school to just punch in right, midway or like in the top 20. But they've done that. And the other one that I wanted to really point out is ESCP, or as they say in French, ESCP. So ESCP is, I think their story is that they are the first business school that is a dedicated business school since it's opened. So it's like, I don't know, like 200 years old or something like that. Started in Paris, France, but they have campuses in London, in Turin, so Italy, if you're not familiar, in Madrid, Berlin, and Poland, in Warsaw. And I feel like I'm missing one, but I know their full-time MBA program. It's their whole thing is, it's a very European school, right? As you can see there, it's like a pan-European business school and the MBA can be done. I think between the first and second term, you can pivot campuses. So it's like either between Paris, London, and Madrid, and then the second term, I think it's Paris, Berlin, and Turin, or something along those lines. So not only did they enter the FT rankings for the first time, which is a huge deal, but they entered at a very good position. I'm gonna remember. I'm gonna look it up right now. I want to say it's 54. Nope, that's wrong. I'm looking at it right now. 64. Sorry. So no, that's ESSEC. Where is ESCP? 52. There it is. So ESCP entered at 52, but the fact that they have campuses in these countries, that actually puts them in the position of the first or number one business school in the German market, number two in Italy, so that's just after Bocconi, the number three in France after INSEAD and HEC. In Spain, I think they're in the fourth position, and sixth in the UK. So their very unique model positions them super well to be in, very high standards in various countries. I think that's very interesting, and really hats off to them for this achievement this year.
Neat. So how does this figure in for the applicant, right? How do these rankings, what does it mean for them?
Sure. Okay. So a lot of people are very driven by rankings, and I think there's a cultural aspect to that. In certain countries, I've tended to found that the countries with the largest populations, like India, China, Russia, States, Brazil, those are the countries. Maybe because they got a lot of people, they're used to this kind of thing. I don't know. They have to be loud to get their voices heard, but rankings tend to be very important in those countries, and less in other ones. Certain people, cultural family. There's a certain pressure. Could be about your company. Especially if there's some kind of deal where you have either sponsorship or whatever, they expect a certain ranking of the school that you choose, whatever the case. I think rankings, as I said earlier on in this talk, give you a good perspective of what's out there. They show you the landscape of some of the top players in the MBA world. But the deeper you go into your research, and it's very important that you research thoroughly all the programs that you're considering, right? Obviously the website and brochures, but talking to people. People are so much of a part of it, like asking questions to recruiters, but to current students, to alumni. If you have a chance to talk to professors, open houses, whether online or in person, all of these things are going to really deepen and enrich the research you have done. And you'll see the deeper you get into that research and start finding schools that are really the right fit for you, as I spoke about, learning style, personality, culture, class size, diversity, all of these things, you'll start to find the rankings don't matter so much anymore. So a lot of people start off with, oh yeah, I want top 20 only. It's like, okay, that's great. And yes, it's prestigious to be in the top 20. These schools are probably more famous, and there's something to that. But those schools in the top 20 might not necessarily match up with what you're looking for, what's really important to you. Especially if you're targeting some of the niche industries, something, maybe you want to work in sports business or in luxury brands or something like that. And you may not find a school that has that specific niche in the top 20, for example. So again, the message is about the rankings are important. They're very helpful in the beginning, but they become less and less important the deeper you go in your research. And that's why in the end, there's a program out there for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, this is super interesting, because I haven't delved in much with rankings, except with my own process of applying to graduate school. And even then it was more, I was already at Michigan and loved the culture, and I loved how they approached me to be part of a different program. So that was one of the reasons why I got my first master's there. But it is super important, especially who you're going to meet and who you're going to be with and what the culture's like. And so it is interesting how it is a formulaic number, right? That is ranked, and that it's dynamic, because it could change every year.
I also mentioned that it's important to look deeper than the initial list. So when the FT or the Economist, whoever puts out their rankings, there's usually much, much more data behind that. And if you look at the Financial Times rankings, for example, for each of the schools that's listed there, you can click on those schools and you'll find much more information, like some of the contributing factors that helped FT, arrive at the ranking they've come up with, right? And there's these sort of subcategories, like best, program for best school for international mobility, best school for women, best school for entrepreneurship. Who was here? Our colleague Petty, who spoke about Babson, #1 for entrepreneurship for like
Right.
ever. So these, especially, once you start to understand what's important to you, what you're about, what your goals are, there might be a specific aspect of your personality, your career path, that actually it's more important that you look at the sub rankings, as I call them, than the main list. So it's really important that you look at that too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. If you really want, if you want to be in a class that's a cohort that's extremely diverse, whether it's based on gender or nationality or whatever, or that's going to send you places, if you really want to have a very, not only during your program, but afterwards, which programs are most experienced at getting people into other countries for employment post MBA. So just as an example. But yeah, really interesting. Thank you for all this, Bara.
Thank you. This is great.
That's going to wrap up our episode tonight. I don't see any questions coming in, but don't forget you can watch this on your own time on our website, mbawaves.com. Just click on the past episodes tab. Next week, we are getting into episode 41, which is all about the GMAT. This is Bara's world. Topic is here's how to take the GMAT stress-free. Category is here's how to take the GMAT stress-free. So can't wait to get into that with you. And I think we have some coaches joining us next week, or
I'm going to poke around and see who I can invite.
all right, hope so. All right,
Yeah.
cool.
Cool.
All right. See, I have some comments coming in now. I don't know if you can see these, Bara.
Let me see if I can. Yeah. Oh, cool. Great. So Nitin wants to know about UK schools.
Okay.
And
Where I am
Charles,
literally right now. I just had coffee with the director of admissions at Imperial. Got to see the campus there. It's beautiful, like right in central London, in South Kensington. They're of course ranked. I mean, London Business School usually is up there. I'm trying to find where they are this year. LBS. Oh yeah, LBS is number 8 this year. So again, if you click on the individual schools, you can see more detail. Which ranking data. All right, so last year LBS was number 2, and the year before that number 7. So this is like a prime example of how the anomaly of 2021, with the absence of those 7 American schools, shifted things. Right, they were in the number 2 position, and they're back to still top 10, which is hell of an achievement. You can see a lot more detail if you look at the career progression. For example, Ames achieved. I spoke about Ames earlier on in this talk, where alumni are surveyed. Do they feel that their goals, their aims were achieved during and after the program? So think of a percentage score of 91. That's super high. Those who were employed within 3 months' time, 92%. Salary percentage increase, 99. Salary today, 174,500. Not bad. So that's all LBS. And you can see all that detail in there. I'm trying to back it up to the main list. Bara, feel free to jump in anytime if there's anything you see that stands out. Of course, they're up at 22 this year.
No, I don't specifically. I'm salivating because you're doing so much travel in Europe. I'm just, I can't wait to start traveling again. But Nitin, also, if there's a specific question about what kind of take you're looking for, to reach out to Eric after this, if there's a specific thing you'd like to know that you're not even seeing directly in the subcategories that he was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to figure out, there's probably a way to share screen on here. We can start doing that. But yes, both of our contact information is on the mbawaves.com website if you have any deeper questions you want to ask. But here we are. It's past the half hour. It's 6:34 here in London time, and it's time to have dinner. So we're going to end it there. I'm sure Bara has some meetings today on this sunny Tuesday in California.
Yeah.
And that's it for today. So thank you everyone who joined and listened, and thank you for your questions, everyone. And
thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Stay safe, and Ukraine.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.